Yeah, hello
Hi.
everyone. My name's Tom French, and this is Pauline.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to share a few slides, but just to give you a sense of what this is about. Actually, there's meant to be three of us, but unfortunately, there's just two. Tom Watson, unfortunately, who was going to talk about his experiences up in the Northeast, has been called away. He may be able to join us halfway through, so that'll be an exciting addition, hopefully, halfway through. But the idea behind this session is that we're going to talk a bit about our experiences of setting up data groups of different structures, different forms, different focus in particular places, our experiences, what's gone well, what's been not so good perhaps, some examples of stuff that we've worked on, and then to give a bit of space, I suppose, for lots of questions and an opportunity for you guys to have a think about how you might want to think about doing things similarly, or to share your experiences of things you are doing. Yeah, so that's kind of the loose structure, but I'll bring up some slides and we can make it more formal. So bear with me 1 second. So I'm hoping there's some slides there now. Is that okay? So who we are, just to introduce me, my name's Tom French. I'm based up in Sheffield. My day job is a freelancer now, doing predominantly sort of data work, research and evaluation within the community voluntary sector and a bit in the public sector, but worked a lot within charities and sort of community development projects and that kind of thing. But today I'm talking about something I do that's a volunteer role with something called Sheffield Data for Good. So that's a little bit about me. Over to you, Pauline, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Pauline Roach. I am a producer, relationship broker, and freelance journalist. I'm CIO of R&R Organisation, and my work is mainly around data literacy of smaller organisations, community-led organisations in the non-profit sector. And one of the ways we do that is to support the West Midlands Open Data Forum, which I'm here to talk about today.
Great, thanks, Pauline. And just to introduce Tom Watson, I hope he doesn't mind, although he's not here. Tom Watson's sort of similar to Paul and I in that we do a lot of work with the community and voluntary sector. And Tom's been doing a bit of work around something called the Data Jam up in the Northeast. He still may be able to join us in time, so hopefully he will be here, but we'll assume he isn't going to be, so we might have to skip through his stuff. And just to give you a sense about what this session is about, it's really for us to talk a bit about our experiences, me with Sheffield Data for Good, and Pauline with West Midlands Open Data Forum. But hopefully there'll be plenty of time at the end to ask questions, and we've got some questions that might help you prompt thinking about this in your own place. So just through the course of this, over in the chat, which is probably on the right-hand side of your screen in the session chat, it'd be great if people could introduce themselves and perhaps also say a bit about where they're from, because you might be able to link up with people in that sense. But yeah, the first part of the session is Pauline and I talking about our experiences, 10 to 15 minutes each probably. Then we'll have a bit of opportunity for just protected time, I suppose, for you to think about your own ideas in the place that you live or work in. And then we'll have a decent period at the end for asking questions. So please do start popping questions in the Q&A part of the chat as well, and we'll keep an eye on that and come to that at the end, if that's okay. So without further ado, I think we'll start off with Pauline. I am going to be the glamorous assistant, so Pauline's going to shout change slide and I will. So yeah, it's all very, very Chris Whitty. Over to you, Pauline.
Thanks very much, Tom. Yeah, I'm here to talk about the West Midlands Open Data Forum. It was established about 10 or so years ago by the then Digital Birmingham, the public sector organisation, and but for the last 6 or 7 years, I'd say, myself and other people have been running it. I've been chairing for about 5 years, I think. And if you just go on to the next slide, Tom, just gives my Twitter handle, and we have our own Twitter account, and one of our members is pretty good on the logo side, so we developed a logo which helps people to identify who we are. And if you go on to the next slide, it tells you about our mission is to promote the release, reuse, and integration of open data to benefit communities, businesses, and public services in the West Midlands area. So it sounds quite a formal mission, but it is a very informal meeting, and we welcome new people all the time. So we find being open, being transparent. We publish our minutes and agendas on our website every time, and we have recently started recording our sessions. So we try to be as open as we can and model it for our colleagues around the region. So if we go on to the next slide, and Tom, if you're able to play, it's a very short video which one of our members made about explaining what open data is. So if that will run, that'd be great. If you're able to, is there sound on it? Okay. This is available on the West Midlands Open Data Forum website if anybody wants to see it with the sound on.
I might just try that again. Bear with me.
Yeah.
Just let me know if the sound works. One sec.
No, can't hear any sound. Anyway, it's just some short messages about what open data is and encouraging people themselves as able to contribute to the sum of open data to help understand how society works, as it just says on the screen there. It can be very simple in the screen share saying it's muted, apparently, according to one of the people in the chat. I don't know if you're able to get back to that. Anyway, we can, oh, there we go. Are we having something now? Yeah, Ted Ryan is saying, my colleague is saying, using data to enhance business cases and progress better services within BCS organisations, particularly, which would be relevant to this festival. Okay, we're trying to load it again. Sorry about this, folks.
Any joy? I can't make the sound
no,
work.
it's no. Okay, let's move on. If we go on to the next slide, the people involved in West Midlands Open Data Forum, and this is a slide created by my colleague Ted Ryan to explain that we have data holders, data users, and we look at bringing the data to market in various places. So the various people involved in the forum are from national and local government, including the Combined Authority in the West Midlands, people from the health sectors, people from the Transport Authority, colleagues from the emergency services, from arts organisations, and third sector and civic society organisations. And then we network with other people relevant in the area around data and open data generally. And if we go on to the next slide, we have a website, the WordPress website, so a number of us can kind of do edit it from time to time. As I say, we put all our agendas and minutes up on the website. And we recently had, as in other places, we had the mayoral election in the West Midlands last week, obviously. So we wrote to all the candidates asking them for their views on open data and what their policy would be. We did this in the first mayoral election in 2017, and we got a very good response from all the candidates who submitted their plans. This time round, unfortunately, we only got one response from the Lib Dem candidate, and we published that on the website. We invited others to respond as well, and we got one more response from Pete Durnell, and we published that. We added that to the Twitter and to the website, so we were keeping people informed. We've been having up to COVID, I suppose, bi-monthly meetings, because meet on a regular basis, and one of the main parts of the meetings were to get people to that they were using or would like to have available to use, that would be relevant to their work in the region. And members seem to enjoy talking about what would be practically useful for them to have, and we have had some successes in getting more data released. We also organise an annual event around Open Data Day, which some of you may know is the first Saturday in March usually, and we usually have our event on the Friday, and we've had unconference type events, and also conference, more organised sessions type events. If you go on to the next slide, Tom, pictures from a typical Open Data Day event that we've had, and on the top left is Tom Fort, who some of you may know from ODI Leeds, and he's always a good speaker. He speaks about bus data often. He's very fond of the West Midlands. He used to live in Birmingham, so he brings great enthusiasm to an event, a data event. So I can highly recommend him as a speaker, if anybody else is looking for speakers. As you can see, there's various tables talking about different topics during the day. And if you go on to my final slide is about what we've done recently. And because of the pandemic, obviously we couldn't meet face to face. We were having some success in traveling around the region and making sure that we met in different places so that people could participate. So more recently, we've had speakers come and speak, as everybody else has, on a Zoom call. So if you look on the top right, you'll see one of our more recent ones. So we've had 4 of these in the last 12 months. Tom Ford's was the first one, and then we had colleagues speaking about the Managing Data Quality book, which is published. I'm trying to get it up on my screen. Yeah, a practical guide by Tim King, and this was a book, a very readable book, I found, so I can recommend it to the audience. A practical guide to managing data quality, and some great stories in about managing data quality, which I think people would enjoy. We also had a session about the national data strategy. Some of you may have participated in as well, with Millie Zametta from the ODI and Rachel Caldicott, both of whom wrote brilliant papers about it, and it was very useful. And our most recent talk was from Peter Wells, ex-ODI and now freelancer in the data world, who speaks knowledgeably about algorithms, and that was a session about how algorithms influence public sector spending, which again would be very relevant to. And hopefully, I think Peter is one of the speakers in a session during this festival, so I highly recommend going along to hear what he has to say. Unfortunately, although we were offering events online and we cut our meetings down to an hour, just members, for obvious reasons, had other priorities around COVID, and so we didn't get the attendance that we were hoping for. So we've recently done a survey to ask people whether they think it's time to fold our tents and kind of is the job done. But we're happy to say we've got a feedback to say, keep doing what you're doing. Things will come back to normal, or whatever normal is. So please keep going, and we'll try and do that. So that's the end of my presentation for today. Thanks, Tom.
Great, thanks, Pauline. We were going to move on next to Tom Watson to talk about some of his work up in the northeast, but unfortunately, if you missed it at the beginning, he's done this just at the moment, but he may join us in a bit. So I'll just skip the slides forward. So it'll be me talking about Sheffield Data for Good. Just a quick reminder that we'll come to a decent Q&A session at the end. So please do pop your questions in the Q&A tab of the chat on the right hand of the screen. So just bear with me 1 second while I get the slides up again. Okay, so hopefully you can see that now. So Yeah, my name's Tom French, as I said at the beginning, and something I set up best part of 3.5 years ago now, tail end of 2017, was a local initiative in Sheffield where I'm based and grew up, called Sheffield Data for Good. So just going to talk a bit about that journey, really, how it came about, how we sort of run it, what tends to happen, and all the chaos that ensues in between the cracks, really. So this is me. If you do want to get in touch, I'm always happy to talk about these things, sometimes at length, so be warned. These are my Twitter handles there, me personally, and the Sheffield Data for Good one. And what is it in words? I guess it's about bringing people together in the city, not just from the data side, but also from the social side as well. So bringing those expertises together and treating them as equal, really. And what was quite clear when we first started doing this is that people wanted it to be about people in Sheffield with that expertise, talking about some of the stuff that goes on in the city and the challenges and how we can help to understand those. So that's kind of what it is in words, I guess. If you're more of a pictures person, it's that coming together of the data and the social bit. And just to reiterate it in another picture, it's the last one, I promise. It's more about this kind of understanding of the problem locally, as opposed to how we might create a solution. And the reason for that was, I suppose we recognise there was a lot happening in the tech for good space. There's a thing called Sheffield Digital as well, where lots of clever people like know how to build stuff. For us, Sheffield Data for Good's role was like understanding the particular challenge at hand that we could then sort of hand over to people that might have technical solutions for it. So that was our thinking early doors. So who's involved then? I think the first thing to say is we're all volunteers, myself included. There is no money involved, and I'll come back to that in a bit. And it's sort of a mix, really, of we have a lot of people that come from local community groups and charities, but we also have local academics, people who are data scientists in their day jobs, people from the university who are doing data science courses and want to learn and be exposed to real data, and a lot of people who just are interested in using data better, analysing it, but in real world and for good settings. So it's a real mixed bag, but everybody brings something, and everybody shares that expertise, and we try as best we can to make it a really level playing field and say things like no data expertise needed to turn up, because it's all valid stuff, really. So this picture is taken from a recent data hack, we called it. You might see in the foreground there's a kid, so it's a pretty inclusive space. We just want to make it as easy as possible for people to turn up when we do come together, and I'll talk a bit about some of the formats we've done that, and just have a go, really, at trying to understand something that's going on in the city. So I suppose one thing is worth reflecting on is how this came about. At the time, I was working for a charity called Good Things Foundation in Sheffield, the national charity, but head office based in Sheffield. I was working the design and research team there, and we were thinking basically about community-led responses to digital inclusion. That's the context. So I think we were beginning to think about how we could understand the people with which we worked better, and we started thinking about ways in which data could help us do that. And then we realized that we didn't have a huge amount of capacity to do that in-house. So how could we bring people together to talk about that as a broader conversation? What happened then is I think it realized that it felt a bit like a charity trying to draft in data expertise specifically for their own purpose. So we started thinking, well, what happens if we just made it broader than just us? We might learn something about it as a charity, but how can we make that broader? So that was it, really. We thought, well, how can we make this happen? And there's a guy called Tim Brazier, who's a service designer in Sheffield, who I used to work with at the time. And I tried to make this thing as complicated as possible. And he just said, get a lot of people in a room that are interested in this stuff and ask them the questions, and they'll probably have the answers as to how this thing might work. So this picture is a whiteboard we had that evening when we brought people together. It was literally that, an hour long event. If you're interested in using data to understand challenges in the city, please come and tell us what that might look like. So that's sort of the start of it all. What happened as a consequence of that coming together is a lot of people documented particular things that were of interest to them, like homelessness, social isolation, this, that, and the other. So after that event, we thought, well, we need to focus this in, hone in on something. So we just put all of those things that people said out to a vote, and used Twitter and Voluntary Action Sheffield to sort of promote stuff. And basically the graphic on the screen is like the immediate response to that. So homelessness being the preferred option as a thing to go at that time, and it wasn't to exclude the other things. It was just like trying to get a focus to start with. So we set about going around homelessness. So before I talk about some examples of some work we've done, just to give you a sense of some of the tools we use. Back when it all started, we used Meetup because it was very much a face-to-face thing. So we ended up actually with like the best part of 600 people in the Meetup group signed up, keeping an eye on the events and this, that, and the other, which is pretty staggering, really. I mean, I think it's worth noting that probably within that there's 50 people who are the sort of diehards, turn up each and every time and contribute. But it ended up being quite an expansive community of people talking and turning up to these events. But obviously, as things have become a bit more virtual, we've kind of set up Slack channels to do most of that conversation stuff. So we're kind of slowly migrating people across from Meetup to Slack, but still using both. And we use things like the usual suspects in terms of online documents, collaborative things, and I'll talk a bit about how we've used Dropbox Paper in a bit to do some of our data work. But as challenges arise, we tend to put together a Google Doc that says we think people want to talk about this, and then we just share it with the world and just let people pile in, basically, and add what they know or what they think the gaps are or whatever. And that's usually the starting point for a bit of work. So a bit more about how it all works, the mechanics. That is a picture of a biscuit, because biscuits help in getting people together, and people bring food to these meetups. It's like quite a nice kind of social event, really. And as I say, we're all volunteers, and there's no money involved other than the purchasing of biscuits, which I tend to do. But that's just really as much to say that it is about people coming together locally with an interest in sorting out some of these challenges, really, whether it's data they bring, data expertise they bring, or otherwise. The other thing it does take a lot of time. You know, there are events that we run where people do work with the data, a bit like data cans, work and data dives and that kind of stuff. But it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of effort that goes in building trust with people in advance, whether it's community groups or just kind of understanding the problem enough that when you've got an event, you don't stand at the front and go, we don't know what this is about. There is some shape to it. So having said that, there's like no money involved in it, there is quite a lot of investment in time. And as an organizer of Sheffield Data for Good, it tends to be me that does a lot of that. And like I say, there is money for biscuits, but there isn't any specific funding involved in this. And I think this is partly my paranoia that if we introduce money, then it'll somehow shift the dynamic. But actually, I think a lot of people feel that it's because there is no agenda, they can freely explore challenges, and they can explore new ways of using data for them, so they can learn in the process without a sense of having to produce an output or a desired thing at the end. And that, I think, helps a lot of people just get in the zone and feel comfortable, really. So just a little bit about what it's done. I've chosen 3 specific examples because I think they're quite representative of the different ways in which we've worked. So this picture here is back in the early stages when we decided to focus a little bit on homelessness in the city. We had quite a few different get-togethers where we were trying to define homelessness and all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't until we had one evening event where I foolishly booked it on the same day as an England football match in the World Cup, and only 3 people turned up. One of which is Amy from a local homelessness charity called Roundabout, who's on the left-hand side of that picture. And because there were so few people in the room, she actually said, "Let me show you our CRM," just out of interest, because we, why not? There's 3 of us in a room and everyone else is watching the football. So she showed us that, and it was like a real light bulb moment that she felt it was a safe space with few people to open up and say, like, here's some stuff, could you help us wrangle with that? But for me, it was a bit of a light bulb moment that, okay, right, here's something contained, a challenge to go at. Somebody wants some help with data use, a local charity. It's in line with the homelessness agenda that we'd sort of democratically decided we wanted to focus on. And here was a clean data set that we could work at. And that began the process of a lot of trust building with that organization to sort of clean and anonymize their data and provide it in a form that meant we could get together and do some analysis. And then essentially we did a DataKind style data dive with them one Saturday, where obviously there were biscuits. I mentioned the role of biscuits. People turned up and we went at it. So I'm hoping this will work, but can you now see this? Yeah. So this is where Dropbox paper comes in. So what we do with our data hacks is we set up one of these documents. It's got a bit of guidance at the front and an agenda for the day that goes on, and then we pile in all the files that people might need for the day, and then we just run sort of hour-long sessions and come together for a half an hour each time and just let people swim around in the data really and produce stuff. It starts off fairly bar charty and superficial, but it can get quite meaty as you go on with sort of statistical analysis and that kind of thing. The reason we use Dropbox paper is a bit like a Google Doc if you've not used it before, but it's just a bit better at having, you can put in a picture or you can put in a bit of code and annotate it and stuff. And we sort of encourage people to just say how they reached that conclusion. So one of the reasons that was quite powerful is because we had data people in the room doing that, but we also had homelessness experts. And actually having those people in the room leading the conversation and going, I see that that's clever, but tell me what it actually means for me doing my job, was really, really powerful because it steered the kind of conversation. And just to give you a sense that the benefit to Roundabout, it was actually they got quite a bit of insight out of it that they could directly use, but actually for them, it was a realization of the value of their data, and as a consequence, they got data volunteers in for their organization on an ongoing basis. So there was sort of like a strategic buy-in thing that happened as a consequence of that, more than actually like the inherent value in the insight that those hacks happened. A second example of what we've done similarly, there's a Dropbox paper thing for this, but this was a coming together, not to look at one organization's data, but to look at a particular thing going on in Sheffield. So in this case, it was, where does grant funding go, to which organizations, and to which areas, and for what purposes. But in that instance, it wasn't so much around an organization opening up the data as multiple sources. So we used 360 Giving's wonderful open data source around funding, but we also entered lengthy conversations with the local authority to get them to give us various poorly structured spreadsheets that were relating to different grant pots from across the city. And we also worked a bit with the South Yorkshire's Community Foundation to get some of their data. So we piled all that together. So why this is different from the first example is it was a bit more about a topic more broadly than an organisation's data set. So we explored grant funding in the city. And the final example is sort of slightly more to present day. April, well, I suppose, yeah, just over a year ago, as COVID was kicking off and all that kind of stuff, Voluntary Action Sheffield realised that they had a role to play in the city's response to that, and how they made it as easy as possible for people to get support, whether that was community-based support, food banks, which shops were actually doing delivery services, all that kind of stuff. So they put a call out just into the internet, I suppose, and we responded to that saying, well, we've got this ready-made group of people, some of which are like data experts. Let's give them that as a challenge. So we did, and we ended up with 4 or 5 different versions of a support map. On there, embedded on their website, that people could go and get support, different types of support, and find where that might be, including some of the kind of community-based support that was going on as well. So thinking about what we've learned, I guess, from that journey, it's all right not to know stuff. I think it's not all right not to know the answer to a problem, but also it's all right not to know what we should focus on or how to structure things, because actually by creating a community, a trusted community, people sort of tell you that, I suppose, and that was our experience a bit. Something else we've learned is that when you put a call out for help, I mean, the amount of people that come forward in a place, and this is just in Sheffield, you know, it's not a tiny place, but it's also not a massive place, but there are loads of people sitting around who want to help and apply their expertise or learn as well, and that coming together is really, really valuable. And the final thing is that it's just not a linear journey. It's morphing all the time. That there is no direct route to, like, this is how this thing should work, and things get joined up sort of weirdly, I've noticed, at later dates, and conversations happen in strange orders. But it is useful at the same time to kind of have when bringing people together to do some direct work on something, to have a bit of focus, whether that's an organization's data or a topic. We've definitely tried a few things where the brief was too broad, and it just didn't quite settle. And finally, then, what's next for us? The short answer is I don't really know. Obviously, COVID has got in the way of the face-to-face things. Conversations still tick over in the Slack groups, and there are ideas emerging all the time. But I think we kind of realised that there are periods where we lie a bit dormant as well, and that's okay too. It doesn't need to have this constant momentum when needed and something neat presents itself. So yeah, that's it from me, I guess, about Sheffield Data for Good. Anyway, so it's 11:10. What we thought might be useful, and we're open to rebuttal on this. We thought it'd be good to have a little 10-minute space where perhaps if you were thinking about doing this for yourself, having some ring fence time just to think about it. So we have some questions to help prompt that for maybe the next 5 or 10 minutes, so we can all go a bit quiet and thoughtful, but use it also as an opportunity to connect in the chat. And then for the last 10 minutes, if we come back together and answer any questions that are in the Q&A part of the chat, we'll take that format. So the space for you bit is, we think, or there are possibly sort of 5 questions you might want to think a little bit about. one is like, why is it you want to do it in your particular area, and why are you the best person to do it? Obviously, there are questions about what is the place. So for me, it was Sheffield as a city. I guess for Pauline, it was broader in a regional sense. Is that fair, Pauline?
Yeah, I mean, Birmingham does tend to dominate a lot of the what happens in the region, and so we wanted to make sure we knew there's lots of things happening in other parts, so we wanted to make sure everybody was represented, and that's why we started moving around the region, having having the meetings in Wolverhampton, Sandwell, and Coventry, as well as Birmingham.
Great, thanks, Pauline. But in that kind of practical sense, I think certainly a reflection from my experience of doing this, and how I made it really difficult, I think, in the first instance, which is where that guy Tim Brazier came in. Is he just went, what are you gonna do first, really? So like, there is a question about who you'll contact in the first instance to get involved, and is there stuff that's already going on that you can build on, so you're not reinventing the wheel and that kind of stuff. I guess there's a question about thinking about suitable tools or places even. Something I didn't mention in my talk is that we just begged, stealed, and borrowed free spaces to do things in. So sometimes it was the office of Good Things Foundation when I worked there. Other times it was spaces above local kind of cafes and things like that, where we just said, like, we're a bunch of volunteers. We do this thing occasionally. Is there any chance you can give us this space if we buy a coffee or two? So thinking about the tools and places used to convene people, and probably most importantly, I suppose, like, is there a next step if you are indeed fired up to do this yourself in your area? Is there like a one next step you could take to get the ball rolling? So there's some of the questions we thought might be useful in thinking about that. I shall try and copy those into the chat, actually. But it looks like we've just been hello, Tom.
Oh.
It looks like he's joined us at the end. So if you want to hear about or ask questions about experiences in the Northeast too, pop them in the Q&A. I think it would be a bit unfair to ask Tom to just pile through his slides just now. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen. I'm going to put those 5 questions in the chat, and if we just take until 20 past, just as a space for you to either think about answering those questions or put some of your questions in the Q&A, or have a bit of a go in the chat and see whether you can connect with people. It's just a bit of protected time for you, I guess. So we'll reconvene in 6 minutes. So just leave it a couple more minutes maybe. Thank you to everyone. There's actually a lot of questions in the Q&A bit. So we'll do our best to work through all of those. If you do have a question, please do pop in there or add your thumbs up to existing ones, and then that'll possibly help us prioritize which ones to look at. And we'll come to that in a couple more minutes. Okay, let's make a start on some of these questions. And we've got 10 minutes left, and I think the organisers are pretty militant with time, so we're going to have to get on with this. I don't know about you, Paul. Is there anywhere you would like to start?
Well, just looking at the kind of the question that's most popular from Heather Blair, how do you get local charities, schools, organisations to share their data? Often people are reluctant to share data. We're also looking to tackle local social issues, so more local data is vital. This is a perennial problem, and it's interesting that at a NAVCA conference a couple of years ago, the then one of the deputy Lord Mayors of London said how important this kind of community data was going to be about, to do with resource allocation. So I think it is more and more important. There is a reluctance to share data from organizations because they're worried about, revealing things about people that they are supporting or working with. But I think if they separate out the personal data from the open data, the anonymized data, if they get somebody in to help them kind of have a look at their data to see what can be shared. And there are data sharing agreements being negotiated, and there's one in the West Midlands I'm very interested in at the moment. I think that would help to have a data sharing agreement. So it's worth spending time on working out an agreement to share certain data. And kind of, I think the thing is to experiment. Identify one type of data that people think they could maybe share, like opening times for organizations, or the number of people who use their services, or the bus routes that people take. There are lots of different definitions of data. So start experimenting with the kind of less controversial data, and then take it from there.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I think one thing that worked for us pretty well in Sheffield, I think, is actually the fact that we were volunteers too. So particularly thinking about like kind of local community organisations and charities. But I think we also did quite a lot of work to go, we're not the trusted entity. Something like Voluntary Action Sheffield might be. So how can we broker that relationship and sort of ask for help, I suppose, in doing that. So there's like the technical bit, I suppose, and then there's the kind of outsider thing in gaining people's trust. But I also think we spent a lot of time particularly honing the narrative around that everyone else has the expertise, not us. And I think that sort of helped us. But like Pauline says, I think there's a lot around data sharing agreements and anonymization that needs to happen first. And it takes time. It took 2 or 3 volunteers from our lot, probably meeting up 4 or 5 times for extended period of time to say how it might work before you even get to like doing anything. I hope that answers the question. Which one's next on there?
One from Kate White about, do you have any thoughts on how big an area you think works for place-based approaches? London is big, but too many boroughs to do individually. Well, I was looking at the size of the West Midlands, which is 2.928 million in 2019, which is huge, obviously. And we managed to run our open data forum across the region with, as I say, representation from the local authorities, most of the local authorities in the area. Well, the main ones are Wolverhampton, Coventry, Sandwell, and Birmingham do participate, kind of on less or more frequent basis, depending on their, what they need to be doing. But maybe it's because we're taking a more high level approach. Maybe if it was more local data, it might be a bit different. Not every borough has to do it, I suppose. Maybe target a few boroughs where having more data about what's going on in the area would be useful to local organizations. You find, as Thomas said before, find out what's important to people, and then see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from our experiences too in Sheffield, sometimes the thing we're looking at is way more local than Sheffield, and I suppose it's one of the things I learned about not being too specific. People sort of tell you what they're interested in, how that could work for us. So it doesn't it's got a loose remit at Sheffield, but it's also a vehicle in which like smaller areas can do stuff, I guess. Tom Watson has also contributed in the chat, just saying that about the size of the area, that North East has been interesting as it's been easier to get traction around things that matter to people, which has generally been towns and cities like the Newcastle, Middlesbrough, or the Metro Mayor, Tees Valley, North of Tyne area. But I guess Tom is also adding that he thinks the themes can cut through the geography a bit. Interestingly, there's another question in there that I think is relevant to this about the kind of standardized approach to data. Like I guess in London, you've got things like the London data portal, which is pretty good, but making sure things are standardized across the board. I think that was one of the reasons for us when we did the grant funding data hack in Sheffield. It was really interesting having 360 giving data for that, which has got a standard, which has a common structure. But we also, they very kindly sent a volunteer up as well to help us with that hack. So it meant that in the process of like doing this local based stuff, we were actually advocating data standards in ways that were more national. So the reality was we were sort of saying to the council and the community foundation, look how you can standardize this, and if you do standardize that, then you can do this broader analysis and get this kind of insight.
I think it is really useful to look at things like GrantNav to see who is sharing data locally, and then work with them maybe to just maybe organize a talk about what they're doing to kind of surface and encourage other people to come out. Like what Lucy Bardner has asked, where do you find local data experts? I think it's about contacting some of the national organizations like DataKind, like 360 Giving, and they will know local people because they'll have been in touch with them. And David Stoneman's asking about getting information from a local county volunteer organization. Again, I think it's finding out what would be relevant to them. It's persuading them that it's in their to share some data. But it's a challenge because they have so many other calls on their time. But I think in Birmingham, for example, they now have a research lead who I think understands data more, and in the Voluntary Service Council. So I'm hoping that we will see more data about the voluntary sector in Birmingham for a start, anyway.
Yeah, and just following on from the finding local data experts, I mean, it's blown my mind how many people come out of the woodwork when you use the word data. I mean, I'm one of those people that I'm sort of semi-technical with data. I'm certainly not mega technical. But I think there was some talk earlier in the first the opening stuff on the stage about what is the definition of data, and I think as soon as, in my experience, you start saying like you might have data expertise, but come and tell us about your other expertise. What you find is that lots of different definitions of data emerge, whether it's kind of like people talking about case studies or that kind of stuff as well. And I think that's all a healthy conversation. I know it's not as easy to sort of standardize or analyze in a consistent way across the board, but I do think when you speak in an open way and just say like, we don't know, loads of people come out of the woodwork, and there are go-to places. I think like obviously the universities have been really helpful in Sheffield, but that doesn't necessarily apply everywhere. And we have things like Sheffield Digital Movement, and where there's lots of people doing technical things in the digital sphere that's kind of got a crossover with data. But in my experience, no, they don't necessarily belong to associations other than things like DataCon, which Pauline's mentioned.
I think it's worth as well flagging up the socials and ask questions on Twitter. You know, there's lots of great people out there with lots of opinions and some good information. So do ask your questions openly. There's one question I'd like to address from Naim Qureshi: a forest of open data out there across multiple portals. How can we effectively cultivate this data to make it relevant information locally? And I would point at the example of Sandwell Trends, which is a dashboard that Sandwell Council keeps up to date, as an example of how you can bring data together to make it more accessible to people. I see we're approaching the end of the time, Tom.
Yeah, should we just? I'm assuming someone boots us out when they're annoyed enough that we've run over. So,
asking how Midlands Open Data Forum was constituted. We're not constituted group. We are a working group of the reps, I suppose, what you say, but everyone's welcome. We welcome people from local authorities, health authorities, voluntary organisations, and private sector as well, because we can all learn from each other. And I think it has affected the success of the project by making it more open and more, people feel welcome to attend or not attend. And I think that keeps it alive and relevant to what's needed locally.
Great, thanks, Pauline. So yeah, that does bring us to the end. Thanks, Pauline. It's been fun. I've enjoyed doing it. And thanks, Tom Watson, as well. Glad you could join us. I know you've been contributing the chat, and mainly thanks to everyone else for coming along, getting involved, asking questions. As Tom's mentioned in the chat, and we mentioned in our slides and stuff, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but we like having these conversations. So if you do want to engage with us on Twitter or wherever, please do. And I'm, for one, more than happy to help or answer any of the questions after this. So
same here.
Great. Nice to have you all. Enjoy the rest of the festival.